Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 20. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. I also want to thank Cerberus Strength for bringing you this podcast for free. Cerberus is an organization that puts the athlete first and is actively working towards providing the best quality gear at an affordable price. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus has quickly evolved into a global brand symbolizing quality and trust. Their ever-growing product range is used by top athletes around the world at the highest level of competition, and every single Cerberus Strength product has been designed with performance in mind, with the highest attention to detail. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use promo code STRENGTH_game to receive an extra 10% off your next order. And I'm excited. In this week's episode, I'm joined by collegiate and high school strength conditioning coach John Patrick. John is a master strength conditioning coach from the CSCCa. He has held multiple positions throughout his career in both the collegiate, high school, and private sector setting of strength and conditioning. As a director, he's had stops at UNC-Charlotte, Kennesaw State, Central Connecticut University, Youngstown State, and Jacksonville University. Additionally, he's held graduate assistant coaching roles at Georgia Southern and the University of Texas at El Paso. He's been an intern with the Jacksonville Jaguars and at New Mexico State, a minor league strength coach with the Cleveland Indians in their extended spring season, and an intern with the Detroit Tigers during spring training. He's also spent close to 3 years as a general manager at a private facility, Set Performance, located in Florida. In addition to his coaching experience, Coach Patrick has competed for 5 years in arm wrestling and continues to train extensively in different powerlifting disciplines from single ply, multiply, and rod categories. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach John Patrick. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited. I am joined by Coach John Patrick. I'm excited to talk to you today, man. So I can't thank you enough for coming on.
No, for sure. Thank you, man. It's a privilege. Been following your career in the podcast for a while, and it's pretty exciting for sure.
Well, I appreciate that. Definitely not as lofty as yours, and I'm hoping to get up there one day. But in the meantime, we'll chat away and see what we can kind of come up with. So, hey, I really want to get right into it. I know we talked a little bit before talking about your training and kind of the disciplines you've been doing, but how'd you first kind of get started into training yourself? I know in the past you've competed in arm wrestling and you do a lot of conjugate style training. I don't know if you actually compete in powerlifting, but that's the predominant way that you actually train. So kind of speak on how you got started, any sports you played growing up and everything.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is in high school, right? I think the way we really all get exposed to training is in high school. And that's pretty much how I initiated. You know, I went to a small high school in Northeast Ohio. Actually started training in middle school. Two coaches there, the Butts brothers, Matt and Mike. And we used to train in a janitorial closet after school. Had 2 squat racks and 2 benches. One day was a high rep day and one day was 5x5 bench squat deadlift. And that's where it all started, right? So we had about, 10 or 15 kids that would go there and, eventually moved into high school and high school, we went to a small high school, obviously. I think I had 74 guys in my graduating class, or athletes, I guess, or not athletes, but students. But we trained very differently than what you'd see in most high schools. We had 3 squat racks in there, and everybody Hatfield squatted. So we had the safety squat bar, and we held on to the pins in front, and that's how everybody lifted. And the big thing is we got strong pretty fast. So, and now looking back on it, I know why we did that just that way, just from the aspect of coaching. As our coach, we only had one coach that would hang out and monitor us. And coaching wise, it was easy. He didn't have to really any bar set up, any bar on our back. We just held on. The safety squat bar stayed on there, and we just sat back and sat down and sat back up, and that's how we squatted until, then when if he found out that we were going to college or whatnot, he would teach us, basic straight bar squatting or how to do Olympic lifts. We didn't do any Olympic lifts. We trap bar squatted. We did Hatfield squats, and we benched, and we did behind the neck push press, and those were our main lifts. It was pretty crazy. That's how we first initially got introduced to lifting, and it was all about lifting as much as you possibly can, just like a lot of other high school programs growing up, and we had some strong guys, but eventually that pretty much I guess that aspect really pinpointed myself as far as what I wanted to do professionally, right? Like what I wanted to do for a career. And I went to school, D3 school in Northeast Ohio called Mount Union College. Lifting continued there throughout. And, that's where, in high school is where I initially met Dick Hartzell. And if you don't know who Dick Hartzell is, we trained with the big rubber bands. He invented the big rubber bands. He had a platform that you put the bands on your shoulders, and he did, speed squats and plyometric jumps and stuff like that. So he was from Northeast Ohio, from Youngstown. And I kind of kept that. And he had like a small gym that everybody would go to on the weekends and train at. Is different teams would actually compete against everybody on different events as far as with the bands and stuff. And it's actually after college, we used those kind of that apparatus during college. And then I kind of got hooked up with him after college as far as training at his facility. And that was like my first like coaching job, right? Like he had a small facility, maybe 1,000 square foot. And one side was like running drills with the bands, and the other side was squatting drills with bands. And he had his ankle program, and he had his low back and his flexibility program. And we learned that. And then we just took people through different athletes through workouts. And that kind of propelled me as far as getting into coaching, because at that time, that was I don't want to show my age, but that was during the late 90s. And that's when the band started being used in Major League Baseball, just primarily to stretch with, just because lifting weights at the time was really taboo. And that kind of propelled me into professional baseball. So I worked in the minor league baseball system for a couple years. And the reason I got into that was just because of the bands. So I'd go out there and we'd stretch with the bands. It had nothing to do with we did some weight training stuff on the road, but really not really enough to today's means. But eventually I wanted to pursue a collegiate career, wanted to get my master's. So that pretty much got me into the collegiate realm. But strength training really came from those junior high and those high school days. I had some great mentors, some great coaches. Still talk about them to this day as far as what we did. And for such a bad rap that a lot of high school coaches get back in the early 90s or compared to today's standards, they really knew what they were doing as far as training. And obviously, we primarily lifted from a strength aspect, just for the fact that, in high school, you can really overpower individuals from your strength rather than, especially if you didn't have technique. So that's why we trained the way we trained. And that what really got me started in strength training today. And I try to continue training as much as possible, as you mentioned earlier. But I think what's really continued my love for training now is just the different people I get to meet, right? Like, just like nowadays we would go to different colleges to meet different coaches or see what they're doing training wise. I think the first thing I do when I first initially get to a new town or a new job is I see what gyms are around that area. So I look to see, what if there's powerlifting gyms or if there's strength gyms or what's really around there. And I go and meet people. So I've had, a pleasure of meeting a lot of lifters, a lot of guys that taught me a lot about strength training, not necessarily from the books, right? Like we all have certifications, we all have books, we all go and visit different schools and talk to different coaches. And that's fantastic. The thing is we may not be able to use what they're doing with our athletes just because they may be at different levels of as far as training age or experience. But for myself, I really got the most out of pretty much lifting with different crews or meeting different guys, whether it was in Atlanta or whether it was in Ohio or in Florida, and now here in Charlotte. I approximately like try to surround myself with good people and good resources. And that's pretty much propelled me as far as my interest in strength training and what I do. And you mentioned about, conjugate training and whatnot. And I think we've all visited different places as far as growth, but, some of these individuals that I've met just have no formal education as far as training goes. It's just something they pick up from somebody else, or maybe they read a book and, you wonder, how does that work? Right. It's against, it may not be what you read in the NSCA book, or it may not be what you're used to as far as trained athletes, but it definitely gives you a different sense of how guys train and what they come up with, and gives you a whole new perspective as far as experience goes. So that's what keeps me going. I mean, I try to reach out to different individuals, and I think now with social media, you can reach out to individuals even more across the country. But I think just visiting individuals really keeps me going and keeps me motivated as far as training as a strength athlete, I guess. I don't know if you really call me an athlete, but I guess a strength advocate, I guess, as far as those kind of things go.
I like it. That's definitely the one thing I do as soon as I get there. I need to see some more gyms and kind of go as soon as I get like affiliated with a new place. But that's the one thing I do as soon as I go to a new program. I lift on like every single platform. Like I want to know, all right, is this platform different than the third one, different than the fourth? Like, does this one have a bum wheel on the bench? Like, I want to know all those things, but definitely surrounding yourself with some different people and kind of getting a feel for the area and those different gyms is awesome. I mean, you said it yourself, like, I think you're an athlete though. Even if you're not like competitively doing something at it, like right. You're a strength athlete and a strength advocate. And it's awesome to hear that like everything that initially got you started in high school has continued to develop and continue to advance like nowadays. So kind of touching on that stuff, we talked about it previously with the conjugate method and like some of the things that you've been doing. How specifically has your training evolved? You've been in a lot of different stops. You've been in a lot of different states, like within your coaching experience, but like throughout your time, like up until this point, like how has that training personally for you kind of evolved? And then kind of going off that, like has how you trained also impacted a little bit of how you coach as well?
Yeah, I mean, my training overall has evolved. Right now, I'm training for longevity, right? How can I maintain or increase strength and keep doing this for a period of time, right? I think there's a point in time in everybody's training that you kind of feel invincible, right? Like you're like, hey, I could keep doing this forever. There's no problem with that. And then all of a sudden you have the stressors of a job or stressors of relocating, of a relationship. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, how can I keep everything in unison, or how can I keep everything flowing? Because usually something's going to dip down, right? Like, or something, you have to give something up, right? So, the biggest thing is really training for longevity now. And I think the way things evolved, like the only thing I knew, just like I talked about earlier, was how I trained in high school, right? Like that's all I knew. Got into college, was still training similar, but obviously that changed depending on change of location and what we had going on from an athletic standpoint. And then, obviously when I got working in professional baseball, we had the facility there at the complex, but then if we're traveling somewhere, training totally, if we're training in a regular gym or something like that, or what equipment we had, now all of a sudden your training was thrown off dramatically, right? So there was a period of time where I didn't really train very consistent, right? Like I might've been a director of an institution, a lot of stressors, managing of a staff, and all of a sudden, end of the day comes and, it's a 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night. And now I have to train because I never train at the time in the morning. And I'm like, well, I'll just do it tomorrow. Right. Like I'll just do it the next day, and that kind of got me from the strength aspect into, that's where I kind of got affiliated with arm wrestling. And I know that, people think arm wrestling is kind of like the old back, bar room kind of deal. And initially that's where it started. Like, me and my friends were in college and we're hanging out at the bar, And all of a sudden, they had like a arm wrestling competition, and we didn't know at the time. But there was a group of traveling arm wrestlers that were national caliber, and they would have this traveling thing that would go to different bars, and it was their practice. So they would get all the young guys. They would arm wrestle against them, and not only did it feed their ego, but it got them a little bit of practice and made them a little bit of money on the side. And they would always go to the same bars around campus, and we're like, like something's up with this, we kind of caught on. So we kind of pulled the guys aside and said, hey, what are you guys doing? This, I was a Pennsylvania state champion for the last 4 years, and that guy over there is the Ohio State champ. And we're like, oh, this is actual like thing. Like, you guys are like nationally ranked. And like, yeah, like this is just practice for us. Like, this is like anybody we meet here. If it's something that you're really, really good, then we'll invite you to practice, and we're like, oh, all right. So it got us, really into those kind of things. And it got me a little bit more knowledge base as far as those, that strength sport. And my training kind of switched, because obviously very similar to wrestling, there's weight classes, right, for arm wrestling. So obviously the taller you are, the heavier the weight class, the shorter you are, it's probably more prominent to be in a lower weight class. So I'm not of a really really tall stature, right? So I was kind of going against a lot of guys that might be 6'5", 6'6", had a lot really long levers, and all of a sudden I'm over here at 5'10", maybe 5'10", and I'm like, something isn't working out right for me. So I had to really change in the way I was training. I lost some weight and started doing more cardiovascular stuff, but really working on a lot of aspects as far as training. And I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and that's where predominantly I really kind of fell in love with arm wrestling, because there was actually teams that I actually found that actually had arm wrestling practice, stuff like that. So I was kind of like, 2 times a week, I think it was on Tuesdays and Saturdays, we'd have arm wrestling practice. So Tuesday at 7:30 at night. So I'd actually have my intern finish up my last group, and I would leave work early and go arm wrestle. And then on Saturdays, it was in the morning. So I had no problem getting to that, because we didn't usually work on Saturdays. But, the thing is, I didn't understand what kind of effect it would have on my strength, right? Just just because you're strong doesn't really make you an effective arm wrestler. It's a lot about leverages. It's a lot about different positions of the hand and in the body. But the recovery aspect is huge, just from a tendon strength aspect, as far as tendonitis kicking in, as far as bone spurs, different things like this. And all of a sudden, a lot of my lifts that I was training for from a strength aspect just started diminishing. I could barely bench 225. Lower body wise is where most of my weight is from the waist down. And, I wasn't doing a lot. I had to lose weight to get a certain weight class. So all of a sudden, some of my lower body lifts, I had to do, some more metabolic work, or I wasn't really focusing on any hypertrophy work or any strength work. So all of a sudden, some of my lower body lifts started to diminish. So there was a mindset I had to switch. Like, it was like, hey, it's not going to be for strength anymore. We have to do this for arm wrestling. And that 4 years I spent in Jacksonville training with that team and being around those type of people really, I guess, evolved my training from that. And it was more, I think it was more psychological than anything else, right? Like, if you're training for a period of time and then all of a sudden, everything's to benefit, to increase, right? And then all of a sudden you're training and then all of a sudden your lifts start going down. You're like, hey, something's up. Like, either my plan's not working or I'm doing something wrong. Well, pretty soon I understood that it wasn't about strength anymore. Like, I had to work on different aspects. So my relative body strength, got really strong as far as doing, calisthenics, as far as doing pull-ups, push-ups, hand strength stuff. So that really evolved some of my training. And, I ended up moving job positions to a different area. And that's kind of what got me out of arm wrestling, is there wasn't these crews anymore. Like, most of it was in the South. I think our team in Jacksonville, we had close to 15 or 20 members, right? Men and women. And so you had practice. I think we had 3 or 4 tables going on at a time at practice. You'd be there all night. It became more of a social things toward the end. But there's just different training aspects that you could do. And it became, just like anything else, became a way of a way of life, right? Like, hey, I know Tuesday I'm going to practice. I know Saturday I have to be at practice, and there's like a competition I have to train for. So obviously, just like you would, I hate to use the word peak, but obviously as you would train for a competition, we would train the same way for arm wrestling, more table time than actual like GPP work or weight training aspects. And then all of a sudden it was progress. So we would, we had two or three big meets a year that we would go to. And that's where I kind of fell in love with it. And then obviously, like I said, I mean, I still had a love for that aspect, but obviously the real life gets in the way as far as job goes. So once I moved to Ohio, I got a job at Youngstown State University, and that kind of another director role. So that even put me in a realm where I had to almost start from brand new again. So now all of a sudden, some free time that I normally would have when I was in Jacksonville, I didn't have that same free time at this other position. So it kind of, I wouldn't say that the passion died down, right? But then all of a sudden my interest as far as my strength made another turn, right? So made it turn to more strength-oriented aspects again. And then like I talked about before, just a longevity aspect as far as training for duration. I think at Youngstown, I don't think people really understand that, but when you're a head strength coach or when you're in a director's position, you wear a lot of hats, right? And all of a sudden, one day you're feeling good, but then one day you may have a lot of stressors at work and you're just running out of time as far as when you can train. So during that 4 or 5 years at Youngstown, like training was just off and on. Like, some days, some weeks are good, some days were bad. The thing is, I was just trying to, and I got very frustrated just for the fact that some of the strength level I had before, obviously I had to lose because of arm wrestling, and I didn't have, so I had to start from square one again, right? So that was a progression where I was slowly evolving back into training again and slowly growing as far as that goes, getting stronger and stronger. And then, just like we talked earlier, just meeting different people. That's where I first, met some individuals that really helped me move training in the right direction. I started talking, there's a power lifter, or he's a gym owner now. He has a lot of different equipment now, but Mike Bartos, he makes like the Stone of Steel and makes some different implants. He's from Youngstown, Ohio. Started interworking with him a little bit, getting some of his knowledge. Dude is smart beyond, like I said, he has a formal education, but it's something that he never really wanted to be a strength coach. He owns his own gym, but he never wanted to be a collegiate strength coach or anything like that. But he makes some great high quality products right now. But it's something that just bouncing off ideas, getting ideas from him. And he has a really good genetic makeup as far as how he trains and stuff. So he's very intelligent. But every time a new position would come, or maybe I would go to a different location, obviously seeking out other individuals that would help me during that phase, right, of what I was looking for. So, I've never really gotten back into a position or an area where I could continue to arm wrestle. But I have gotten back into an area where I could really focus on strength aspects, right? And I think the most knowledge I've gained is just recently. I mean, just recently being here in Charlotte. There are some gyms around the area, but being so close to Columbia, South Carolina, and then obviously, Donnie Thompson and the crew down there has really transitioned, I guess, my training into a longevity aspect. So, I mean, does that means, whether it's, a lot of people kind of justify, powerlifting as having raw and then obviously using gear, single ply, multi-gear aspects, but I've been using more briefs, more, I guess, different training devices to not only excel my strength, but obviously prolong the ability of me to train longer. So I think that's huge. I think it kind of gets a bad rap. I think a lot of people get mixed up and it has to be one way or another, but you can obviously increase, if you're wearing gear as far as briefs or suits or bench shirts, you can obviously increase your raw strength just based off basic overload principles. And that was something I was really never exposed to in the past. I just thought it was one or the other, right? Like if you're going to make a switch to gear lifting, you have to make a switch wholeheartedly. And that really hasn't been the case. I think, just having normal conversations with Donnie and really him being, open about everything as far as how to train and actually going there and training and some of his, I guess, inventions, sort of say, as far as what he's been using and what's long, he's in his 50s now. So obviously what has progressed his career and his longevity of support, I think, is really, really awesome. So that's kind of propelled me as far as my training goes. Obviously, coming up with injuries and trying to prolong it through injuries. I mean, it's going to happen, right? The longer you're in it, the human body isn't made for lifting weights. It's not supposed to be made for lifting weights. So the more that you put yourself through those external forces, there's going to be something that gives. So really trying to adapt your training and overcome things. And sometimes it's an ego crusher that you might have to restart some things over. But I mean, those are the biggest things, is really educating myself on different vices. But it's really I use it more of a stress release. I think a lot of people, I know I'm never going to be a great power lifter, right? I know I'm not going to be like a great athlete. The thing is, I really use it because I'm trying to educate myself for the long run, and how can I use these I guess techniques or these philosophies that I'm learning. How could I use it in the preparation of some of my athletes training? Not necessarily training them as power lifters, but really using some of those concepts to train them as athletes overall. Because wholeheartedly, I mean, that's why we're all in this together. I mean, the biggest thing is how can you gain any kind of knowledge, whether it's physically from doing it under the bar experience or physically talking to somebody, and then how can you implement it with the athletes that you work with on a daily basis? And it might be athletes in the collegiate setting, it might be in the high school setting, heck, it might just be general population, but any little tips or any little cues that you can learn, I think it's huge. And the same thing, the same thing when I lived in Ohio at Youngstown State, like I would travel, around the Columbus area and meet different lifters and whatnot. And, you pick up something, you always pick up something good and pick up bad. It's just like going to visit a coach in college, right? Like you're going to pick up something you could wholeheartedly use. And then you're going to look at something, you're gonna be like, well, I don't know if I'll ever use anything like that. Right. Like, so it's all positive, negative. And I've run into some good individuals that have really opened up my eyes as far as some different ways of training. And I think that's what's really, my whole aspect now is just for longevity and what I could do to benefit. I know I may not be able to lift the same weights in 5 years or 10 years, but as long as I'm under the bar and I'm able to do something, I think it's a positive realm. So who knows, the next couple of years I may change into something and do something totally different. Who knows? So, but it definitely keeps me alert, and it keeps me as far as still hungry to learn more information. So.
No, I love it. That's it's cool to hear about kind of your training and how it's evolved, and to hear a little bit more about like just the nuances of arm wrestling. I know a lot of people probably don't really understand. I've never heard too much about the training aspect or even the competitive side of it. And like you said, like you weren't really aware of how it was going to treat your body, and you had to go through a lot of changes to kind of excel at it. And that's kind of helped you with your career and being able to move around and be adaptable in different places and learn new methods and meet new individuals. Like all that information has continued to help you with your own training, evolve it a little bit, and then also be able to use that information, decipher it, and then apply it to your athletes, which is awesome to hear. Because I mean, at the end of the day, coaches are always looking for different ways to just bring new information in, decipher it, and then replicate it and give it to their athletes in a more concise approach, which is cool to hear.
Yeah.
And I like how you talk about the longevity of it. Going through everything, because obviously, like I don't want to age you either, but I want to be in a position like later down the line too, when I'm still coaching and training. I want to be able to still train in some way, and I'm already starting to kind of see, like you mentioned yourself, like the stress of being in a director role or in a new city and having new responsibilities kind of thrown into it. That stuff affects your training, affects how you kind of approach coaching. And sometimes those things have to take a back seat. And then from like talking with Donnie and kind of seeing some of the things that he's done to keep his career, maybe not as a competitive level that he was before, but still be able to train in a certain factor and a certain fashion. What other things have you kind of found that have helped you kind of continue to train, or like tidbits of either information or tools that have helped you continue train at the level you want to and progress this so that this becomes a long-term thing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is knowing your body, right? And recovery. I mean, we preach it to our athletes all the time. I think recovery is key. Nutrition is key. I think, like we spoke a little bit earlier, my wife's a dietitian, so she has really opened my eyes as far as some things, as far as maybe modifications to my diet. Maybe I don't need as much protein. Maybe I need more. Maybe some carbohydrates. Things that she can modify for my diet, especially me getting older. It is what it is, right? Some things may not sit as well as they used to. So that's kind of being open-minded. And I think that's difficult to sometimes just because it's your spouse and, you don't want to like vice versa. I tell her, hey, maybe you should do this in training. She doesn't want to listen to me, vice versa. Sometimes she tells me what not to eat. Maybe don't go to Chick-fil-A. And sometimes like, maybe I feel like Chick-fil-A today. So it is what it is. Like you have to be open-minded to those things. I think technology is huge as far as training. I do, there's some postings I put on Instagram with an app called CNS Tap Test. And I've been keeping record of that for quite a while. And just, it's really nice visually to see, when my most intensive days are and how I recover from those intensive days. Maybe I need more rest. Because right now it seems as if every intensive day that I have, like a max effort day or whatnot, like I take roughly about 2 days to get back to normalize, right? So, and it usually helps me even more. I found out that about a day after certain dynamic days, my CNS is at my highest peak. So I'm ready to train at a higher level. So, and that's just with me. And I've been kind of following that's been for about the last three or 4 months. Before that, I've used a Whoop band before. And a lot of people, some people have the Oura rings and stuff like that. Like, I think that's generalized good. I mean, the CNS tap test, even though it's a little bit more work than just looking at like, your Whoop score or whatever. I think I get a lot of information out of that personally myself. And even decreasing my volume as far as training. The older I get and maybe the more tactical I get as far as proficient in movement, I may not need as much stimulus over time. So my body, obviously, the way that I've been training for a period of time, I think it's over the last probably, I want to say 3 years or 4 years, actually probably more than that, probably 5 years. It's really evolved, right? So maybe about 5 years ago, I was volume hungry. I thought the more volume, the better. That's the way I'm going to grow. I think, volume's awesome. And then eventually, some things started to pop up, some tendonitis issues, some joint issues. Even though my strength increased, I started to back down on some things and my strength started to increase even more. Right. So I was like, okay, well, everybody, the whole American process of more is better, right? Everybody American thinks, the more caffeine we take, the better, or the more that we can eat during Christmas, the better. Not necessarily. So the big thing was, okay, if I can train, a quicker condensed workout or maybe less days of the week and still get the same results, why wouldn't I do it? Right. And I think that really has to do with the way that we train our athletes too. If we have an hour to train our athletes, it doesn't mean that we have to spend the whole hour doing strength training, right? Like there's other things that we can hit on that's going to be beneficial. So that's something that I've found out myself. Like before, my workouts used to last, might last hour and a half, 2 hours. Now my workouts may last an hour 15. It may take me longer to warm up for a workout than actually doing the workout. But I think that efficiency has really helped me recover a lot more. And then if there's something I need to work on more specifically, I can. But as far as like hypertrophy work or something like that, but it's not necessarily something I do that with my main movement. So it's just something over time that I found that more isn't always better. Recovery is huge. And whether using technology or from a dietetic standpoint, the next thing I really need to work on is just from a sleep standpoint. How can I improve my sleep even more? Whether it's by taking naps or, if somewhere as you get older in age, you might have sleep apnea or whatnot. What's the next thing to make it, or even having working on, breathing techniques, post workout or whatnot to decrease nervous system, expectation and whatnot. So a lot of those things I think are things that I need to work on more. One thing that's really helped as far as recovery goes, and a lot of people, from my training, and actually I've been in institutions where we've actually used this, is wearing single ply briefs during training. So during any squat session, even a lifting session, and we, when I was initially first at Charlotte and helped out with football, we did this, and I actually heard about this at TCU too, earlier in my career, them using some type of briefs or bench shirts. But not only is it overload, but it's another form of accommodating resistance. So if you don't have bands or chains, you could throw briefs on an individual, and it's going to save their hips, especially if they box squat. But obviously it does the same thing as far as accommodating resistance goes, and works the natural strength curve of the body if you don't have those things. But in the hindsight, it really decreases or actually increases the amount of recovery that you can actually have, because you can handle heavier weights. And I believe it's a less stress to the body. Now, it's not less stress to the neurological system as far as the CNS, but it is something that allows the body to handle more weights and be in a protective, a protective environment. So I've been able to do more high intense workouts on a regular basis, or recover quicker from my high intense workouts, just because I've worn a certain device. So, it might be something on my dynamic days, I throw a pair of briefs on, and I will still handle the same tonnage or the same workload, but I'm able to recover a lot faster from that, just for the fact that I'm wearing this device. And it doesn't, it's not like anything, I've worn, multi-ply briefs, but it's just a single, they call it a champion suit. If you go to Inzer, it's like $40. And we used to have our athletes wear these when I was at Charlotte, anytime we did like any type of squat movement or deadlift movement, and they just slipped them on, slipped them off. They didn't need anybody to help them. It's not like they routinely, like, you see something on Powerlifting USA or something, you didn't need 4 people to help you in a suit, but it's just, you just slip them on and off, and then you could handle a decent load, and it really protected the hips overall. So somebody that might, is progressively, having labral issues of the hip, or having some type of low back issue or whatnot, it could be something that you could, predominantly, not necessarily stop those altogether, but it's definitely a way that you could decrease or limit the kind of tonnage that's or the overuse aspect. So that's really helped out a bit. Obviously upper body wise, I think Donnie Thompson has a great invention with the bow tie. I really do, especially working with overhead athletes. It's something that we had our pitchers use predominantly for recovery, because not only does it act as a, it pretty much puts individuals in the proper posture, especially with individuals that are already anteriorly really rotated. It'll put that glenohumeral joint in the right posture position, but then also it's going to act as a form of some type of constriction, right? Some type of compression therapy too. So you can put that on there after they're getting done pitching. We even used it for individuals to help with movements, especially if individual had a hard time setting their shoulders, or we're trying to keep a flat back on, whether it's an RDL or whatnot. I used it on those aspects. Really, it didn't have necessarily with pitchers, but with any overhead athlete that has really huge, anterior rotation of the shoulder, it's not going to fix that movement, but while they're doing a movement, it's definitely going to help alleviate any issues that you might have from a glenohumeral joint aspect, or even from a scapular winging aspect, as far as any kind of pressing movement. So those are 2 big things. As far as pressing goes, people use a slingshot or stuff like that. Like, I think that's great. It just depends. It's different on everybody's approach as far as their technique goes for those lifts. But those are some simple things that I've used to make my training go a little bit longer, and help recovery aspects go. But a lot of people may not think those things are conducive to train their athletes, right? Just because they're kind of outside the box. But the biggest thing is take 1 or 2 athletes and try them out and see if it's something they benefit from them. Like that's all I can really ask you to do. And I'd normally, coming into the situation at Charlotte where we use some of those techniques, I would have said that, you're crazy. Like, that's not going to work. But it really helped me, kind of look past my already preconceived judgment, and said, okay, hey, that might be something that I could carry over. So we took that from a football aspect, and we used it from, a baseball aspect. And a lot of guys, it benefited from them. So it was pretty huge on those retrospects. So hopefully that helps out.
No, that was cool to hear. And I mean, you touched on a lot of stuff that I think most people kind of just overlook when it comes to recovery or like preparedness for a subsequent training session. And a lot of younger people will just overlook that stuff because they recover kind of normal right away. Like it's fast, it's not really impeding their progress, so they don't think it's pertinent. But there comes a time and a place where you actually need to do that. And I think it's even more beneficial for your athletes because at the end of the day, what we're doing in the weight room is GPP for them. So if you can find a way for them to progress and train effectively at a high level and not have some of those residual effects of extra fatigue, but still be able to get the same volume and intensity out of training, then that's all the better for them to actually be able to go on the field and perform without being abundantly overstressed, which is cool to hear. I mean,
I think that's huge, and you talking and I think the big thing that just popped in my mind as far as an implementation, right, is the belt squat. I think the belt squat, a lot of people use it as, oh, hey, a person has an injured shoulder, we can throw them on a belt squat. They use it as an alternative exercise. But if you have the ability to use the belt squat in your actual training protocols, that devises, that takes away a lot of wear and tear on the athlete, especially if they're back squatting continuously, or if they're, doing some type of movement continuously and they have weight or some type of spinal load. I think the belt squat is a huge implement. If you're able to have, if you're in a basketball weight room and you're able to have 4 of them and can get, a pretty progressive aspect. When I was at Charlotte, we redesigned a room and we have plans in place to put, 5 working belt squats in there so we can actually implement them into our routines as assistance exercises. I think that's a huge aspect. And not only from, a squatting aspect, but even from if we need to do something anterior loaded, we could do that on the belt squat. If we need to do something single leg, we could do that without, with spinal traction without putting a low overload on, especially from a baseball athlete or from an overhead athlete, without putting any excessive pressure on the shoulders, right? And that's another thing too, is like, I grew up around safety squat bars, and as we talked a little bit earlier, that was the main when I was in high school, that was our main aspect of training, was a safety squat bar doing half field squats. But from a standpoint as far as a training aspect, why not, especially from a high school athlete, right? Why not get them implemented first with a Hatfield bar, whether it's a back squat or a front squat, especially of individuals that maybe are unable to do a front rack position or maybe unable to put the bar placement on their neck correctly. Using those different variations of bar, that's just one example, but using those different variations of bar to have longevity of the joints. At those younger ages, we think, you've seen kids, do different plyometric jumps or fall in different angles that look like that would just normally break a certain individual of an older age, where those are individuals that are still going to have wear and tear of the body if they have a straight bar on their back for too long or something like that. So the biggest thing is, why not implement some different training techniques, even though they may be out of the ordinary, that may eventually, have some longevity of the athlete overall, and not get too overused too soon. But getting back, I think the belt squat's huge. Even from a anterior loaded pelvis, you have a lot of athletes that have tight hips. Their pelvis is anterior rotated just by doing some type of traction, like belt walks or something like that, is huge because it corrects that pelvis tilt. So somebody that may have a low back issue, may have a glute issue, something from there, that's going to automatically, a QL issue, that's automatically going to correct it, self-correcting, right? So you have a lot of people that do, PRI breathing or PRI exercises or some type of ART or something like that. Like, that's something that you can implement into just as a warm-up, but then also as some type of corrective for individualization as far as imbalance of the body too. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I wish we had more belt squats because we would do the same exact thing. unfortunately, it ends up being just the person that's kind of reached that tipping point where now they can't squat anymore. They're the ones using it. But if you have access to it, that makes a world of a difference. And I know that once I started implementing that in my program, it's helped with like anything with my normal squat, with my yoke carries, everything, just kind of decompressing my spine, opening my hips back up. And that's a great point. Again, like we're looking for optimal training. Doesn't really matter what the method we're going to use is, as long as at the end of the day, like it's getting the purpose done for the goal we have in mind. So that's great to kind of hear. Hey, so kind of shifting gears a little bit. Obviously you're a master strength conditioning coach, class of last year, the pandemic year. So unfortunately, it was all virtual, but I wanted to kind of get into a few things since you've been a lot of places in your career and you've been in a lot of different stops. So was there, out of all the stops you've had, was there ever a defining moment in any of them? Or was there one of them that kind of taught you like the biggest lesson, either from a loss, a mistake, or success that has kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think earlier in my career was really, I mean, it should be defining everybody's career, right? But I think from a philosophy standpoint, we talked this about a little bit earlier, but from a philosophy standpoint, my first initial head position, right before I'd be at a GA at Georgia Southern, was the director of strength conditioning at Jacksonville University. So from a philosophy standpoint, all of a sudden, you know, I went from working, when I was a GA, I worked with, I believe I had 3 teams, and had a great mentor there, and Kelly Newhouser, worked with an assistant there, Mike Bewley, and that was a staff, right? And so I worked with those teams, 3 teams, and then I helped assist where I needed to help with other teams. But then I went right into being a head strength coach. So, you know, when I was a GA, pretty much my bosses, you know, my boss, Kelly, told me, hey, you know, do what you want to do. Training wise, there's no really restrictions. He was a great mentor. And I kind of went in, you know, to JU, like all guns blazing, right? Like it was myself. I think I had 1 intern at the time, and I think I had 15 or 17 teams. I don't even remember, but we're working 6 a.m. To 7 to 8 at night. And we're just rolling through teams on the hour. Might've had like an hour or 2 break, you know, in between the day somewhere, not usually around lunchtime, because that's, a lot of kids don't have class during that time. So we had to get them in the train. And we had a small room, 2,500 square feet, had 8 racks, 8 platforms shoved in there. And the big thing was, philosophy wise, is, you know, I came from or grew up around Olympic lifting. So the big thing was, it was all right, well, how, you know, we had some bumpers, you know, our bars weren't, we had the old York sleeve on sleeve bars that were made like during the 80s. So they didn't really rotate very well. So you're trying to run an Olympic program off of equipment that you just didn't have the resources for, right? We had the old composite, you know, bumper plates that, you know, with humidity and over time just fell apart. So one bumper might be 45 pounds. The other one might be, you know, 43 pounds, who knows? And the collars would always, you know, fall out. So you're trying to fix those. But so we're trying to run an Olympic system, you know, and you know, it was run efficiently. We did a good job. You know, the thing is, over time, is just the same groups coming in, us teaching individuals the same lifts day in, day out. It became very monotonous, right? And I wasn't really learning anything new. The only way I got new education, because I was working, you know, 70 hours a week, was, you know, maybe something I learned off the internet, or from making a phone call, or predominantly from new interns, right? So we would get new interns almost every semester, just because individuals were coming to do it for school. But what really opened up is like I talked about earlier, was seeing my surrounding area and who could I benefit the most by talking to certain individuals. So from a philosophy standpoint, like we talked about, you know, I reached out to, at the time, at the Jacksonville Jaguars, strength coach there was Mark Asanovich. And it happened that, you know, I called him up, I left word. He actually called me back, which is awesome. And, you know, I said, hey, I'd like to have some free time in the morning. I'd like to help out, you know, during training camp, during OTAs, if possible. And he said, sure, come on down. So, you know, I'd get down there around, I think it was 4:30 in the morning, help out for a couple of hours, and then head back to work for the rest of the day. And this is right around that May period, you know, so it's kind of slow on campus, just because everything's off campus. or all the teams are predominantly done, but he's pretty much a high intense machine based application during OTAs. So all of a sudden, it was a system I was never really used to before, but I was receptive, right? So how can I use this philosophy and this mindset to help out our athletes, right? So whether it was, we didn't have a lot of machines, but is it controlling the tempo of the bar during certain lifts? It was manual resistance exercises. What are certain prehab exercises like he was very big into and still is into training the cylinder of the neck and working manual resistance just from a concussion protocol. Is that something that we could put those things into our system? So, taking those two totally different training techniques and collaborating and, him taking the time when I had extra time to sit down with me and explain why he did thing and question my philosophy made me learn my philosophy even more, right? So all of a sudden, why are you doing Olympic lifts? Why are you front squatting? Why are you doing this with your athletes? And all of a sudden, I had to come up with legitimate answers on defending my philosophy that I never had to before. So it kind of opened up that area as far as how I could use that his I guess some game plan of what he used into my area, just because we're dealing with two totally different athletes and two totally different resources. But it's all about what, positive things that you can grab from something and negative ones, right? And then another philosophy aspect during that same time period, I think it was right around my last year, 2008, is I had an intern come on. His name's Willie Danzer. And Willie was pretty much a proponent of the conjugate system, learned from Ryan Sizik, who's in the tactical force. And then obviously Tom Malinsky, who used to be the head strength coach of the Jaguars, and pretty much came with this philosophy and, started to not necessarily question, but we started to discuss things, right? So we started to discuss how could we be more proficient in our training? How could we possibly add some more muscle mass on our guys? How are some means that we could develop those things? Because I had experience with Dick Hartzell before in the past with the large rubber bands and accommodating resistance. So the thing was, as soon as he saw that, he automatically said, hey, this would work great just for the fact of the conjugate system. We started to discuss things more. So it was a huge open discussion. And I think that's where, my philosophy started to shift a little bit. Not necessarily that Olympic lifts are bad, but there may be a more efficient way of training our explosive power, especially with the athletes that we had. We don't have 5-star and 4-star athletes, and they didn't come from a great high school system where they had a high school strength coach training them. At the time in Florida, you could train year round outside. So, they had great speed proponent, but their lifting proponent was very raw. So, our biggest thing is how can we get these kids in? We may have 30 kids in a 2,500 square foot room training is what was the most proficient way we could train these athletes without there being a safety issue as far as, having 4 guys on a platform or somebody doing a snatch and missing a snatch and almost knocking out half the room. Like, what is the best thing we could possibly do, right? Because it's all, this is my first head job, so it's all a learning experience, right? So from a philosophy standpoint, that really kind of molded, 3 different methods of training as far as what we could do for the facility that we had, And then once I moved into another role at Youngstown State, totally different facility, totally different sports that I might have worked with, totally different, assistants that I had more resources. So now that those philosophies that I learned at one aspect that I may not be able to use all of them that I learned, now I come into a new setting and possibly rearrange that philosophy that I had, right? Which is huge. I think that's a huge proponent. I think that helped out, quite a bit as far as, not only it helped me really not get set in one method of doing things, right? So, and then obviously those methods can change sport to sport. So I may have one sport that has a low training age that, may not need certain movements or certain training aspects trained a certain demeanor. So I might use X philosophy with them. And then another sport that may have a totally different aspect, I may use another philosophy with them. So it put a lot of tools in the toolbox and kind of molded. I wasn't setting, I wasn't trying to put a square peg in a round hole, sort of say. I wasn't trying to just, make an individual do a certain lift just to do a certain lift. I could modify that movement to pretty much exemplify the factor that I wanted trained or the quality I wanted trained overall. If that makes, I guess from that sense, as far as philosophy, that was huge. The second part, defining coaching moment, right? And I think a really defining coaching moment for me, and I think we all have these moments that we can, you're sitting there, you're sitting back, and you're like, man, like do I still want to coach? Like, what's the next step, right? So I was at Youngstown State for I think 4 years, and I came into that situation. I was with the coaching staff for 4 years. Coach John Haycock was the head football coach. He's now the DC at Iowa State. And, I came into the situation. We had a coaching change. So a new coach came in, and, I worked a year for that coach. And after a year working for that coach, I just wasn't like, he gave me a shot. I just wasn't his guy. I wasn't the guy he wanted. Right. So I'm sitting there, and he's like, hey, this is, we're going to let you go. It is what it is. I'm going to bring somebody else in. So, huge defining moment for me because, Youngstown was my hometown. I thought I'd coach there for the rest of my career. I'm like, hey, this is my Super Bowl, right? Like a strong traditional program. They've won national championships. Like, this is where I'm going to stay. And then all of a sudden, within a year, things have fallen apart a little bit. So I'm sitting at home. But I got to coach with one of my best friends. He was my assistant. I had some other really good friends that were with me. I had a student intern there that was with me for 3 years. I had another paid intern there was for 3 years. Some really close individuals you get really close ties with, right? So I'm sitting there. I felt, I'm at home. I'm done, and I feel like I've let those people down, right? I've let down the student athletes, and I sitting there and I'm like, this is a defining moment, right? I didn't look at it then. I thought, well, what could I have done different? What could I? And it was nothing. It wasn't my decision. Ultimately, it had nothing to do with what I did. It was just something that in coaching is just not a right fit sometimes. So, I had an option. Hey, can I get out? Can I get out of coaching? Can I, go work a regular job? You can have a regular social life. You can have, regular work hours. You can do whatever you wanted to do. You probably make a lot more money, or is it something that you can continue coaching. You can suck it up. You can try to find that defining moment. You can try to pursue another career and move on. And that's something, I sat down with my old mentor, or not say sat down. I called him up at the time. He was at Kent State, Coach Haycock, and there was a whole year I wasn't with him. Right. He knew that, things just weren't going well. And I sat down and talked to him. And we talked for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and and it was nothing particular what he said, but the message that he gave. And every time that he spoke, he always spoke, he was obviously a predecessor of Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel went down to Ohio State. Coach Haycock was his DC at Youngstown State, got the job and was with him for a period of time. But, at Youngstown State, we had this tradition. It was called the Winner's Manual, right? Youngstown was very traditional. They had the same pregame meal for 26 years. When Coach Tressel took over, we had the same pregame meal. Nothing was changing. We had the same pregame ritual. We did things a very common way. They had this thing called the Winner's Manual. And the Winner's Manual was something was done every fall. And, he addressed to me, he said, hey, go through and, if you're lost, go through and look over the Winner's Manual again. And he's like, they'll give you some direction because there was some spiritual stuff in there. It had everything to do with Coach Tressel began it when he first initiated started in Youngstown State in the late 80s. And I think it was initially only 20 pages. And then eventually when Coach Haycock took it over and he left, it grew around 300 or 400 pages. So they initially just every year put something in about Youngstown, about the community, about Ohio, about what the school was about. Our senior speeches, our seniors during fall ball would stand up and they could talk for 10 minutes or 2 hours about whatever Youngstown meant to them and the opportunity that it gave and stuff. And being part of that, was huge. So, I reread through some of those things. I contacted some of the student athletes I worked with, former athletes, and even athletes that were still there and just got their mindset, of what maybe I could have done better, what their time under me, was like. And, a lot of positive things came out of it. And really, those words that really resonated from that really kind of said, hey, coaching is in my blood. It's what I wanted to do. And it kind of kickstarted me to that next level, right, of what I really want to pursue. And not necessarily that it had to be a head coaching job or just working with football or anything like that. It was about being a mentor, right? And having that growth mindset. I think a lot of people, use the term growth mindset of not letting things holding you back or not giving excuses or whatnot, but really persevering and making your experiences giving you better qualities overall. So that really was a defining moment, I guess, and really like just totally like a light bulb went off, right? Like you first get into college athletics, you're kind of like, oh man, I'm going to make such a difference. My program is going to revolutionize the strength conditioning community. Like they're going to just, oh man, we're going to have so many national championships and we're going to win conferences. And then, you get into it and you're like, oh man, I'd love to work for this school or that school. Oh man, if I worked at, this Power 5 school, we definitely win the SEC. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, like it's not about those things. Like those things are cool, but I'm not about pushing a brand, right? Like I'm about mentoring individuals. If a kid comes to me and goes, hey, coach, during my time, you saw what others didn't see, X, Y, and Z. I want to be a coach, or I want to be a strength coach, or I want to be the head of my, a CEO of my own company, and you help me do that. Then that's a huge aspect, right? Like it doesn't matter, what lift you made them do or what philosophy or how much you got them stronger. At the end of the day, it's about, having an effect on people and really being a conductor of your message, right? And really conveying what you believe in and just treating individuals like people. And I think that's what was a really defining moment. That was like, hey, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm working football anymore or if I'm like have this logo on my back. It really matters about the people I'm pretty much working with, right? And the impact I have on them and really how I can affect them in a positive manner and really be a good transmitter of my message. And that's where I think that huge defining moment really took. So from a philosophy standpoint, I think early in my career, the first 4 years, and then from do I really want to coach again? I think everybody kind of goes through that transition right when you get to that, maybe that 5-year mark or maybe that 8-year mark. You're kind of like, oh man, I have to work another, I'm working weekends again. I can't go out with X, Y, and Z. I can't have a dog because I can't take him out at night because I'm leaving town. I have to find somebody to watch my dog. Like, all of a sudden you have that epiphany of what it's really about, right? And how can I stay in the mix as far as coaching and being that mentor? And those are the 2 pinpoints for me. So.
No, that's great. You touched on a lot of good points that I think any young coach or any coach at any level in their career right now can attest to. And those are some great things to kind of do to either reflect on it. I mean, obviously in coaching, sometimes you're just not the right fit for the position. And it's like you said, it's not against what you did or what you didn't do. It's the business of it. And unfortunately, that's a lot of people don't realize that getting involved in coaching, that especially college athletics and professional everything, there's a business side to it. And at the end of the day, like the higher level coaches that we work for, since we're support staff, they have to be successful in their own right. And if it doesn't work or they don't think it's going in the right direction, like they have to save face too. So, but I liked what you said too. And I kind of took away from like your training philosophy and how it kind of developed was like finding a way to question your own philosophy so you can solidify it. And it's awesome to hear like your conversations with Mark Hasanovich and you guys going back and forth and having some banter about 2 completely polar opposite training philosophies, but you be able to sit down at the end of the day and question each other's to kind of get to the root of why you do it, or to even question why your philosophy might not be better than the others or why it fits a certain situation. And you found that out perfectly when you relocated to Youngstown, coming from Jacksonville. And I'm sure you did the same thing going to some of your next stops. And a lot of people don't realize that the place you're at and like your facility and what you have access to, even your staffing, the number of teams and everything like that, that dictates a lot of what you're able to do. So if you don't have a lot of tools in your tool belt and you're married to a certain exercise or a certain way of training, you're probably not going to last very long, or you're going to be out of a job for a while waiting for just this perfect one to step up. And you're probably going to be stuck out of a job for even longer.
Right.
Hey, so going on that too, you have been a director at a lot of different places, including collegiate side and the private sector. What advice do you have for a coach taking over or building a program or a department for the first time? Obviously, when you took it over at Jacksonville, you were coming from a grad assistant position.
Right.
So you were thrown to the wolves right away. So what kind of advice do you give for someone initially doing that? And then how do you kind of measure quality or a successful strength conditioning department?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing as far as when you come into a situation, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I've come into a lot of director roles. And what I usually try to figure out before I even, when I accept the position and move into it is who or what kind of established culture have they had beforehand, right? So, when I went into Jacksonville University, I knew the strength coach beforehand, or knew of him. He wasn't there very long. I knew the couple other strength coaches before him weren't there very long. So I knew there was a really a disconnect of continuity, right? So the biggest thing was, okay, well, why was there a disconnect of continuity? Why did these individuals keep on leaving, right? And I figured it out. It took me 4 years to figure it out, but I understood what the situation was, right? So nothing against the institution or anything like that, but it was a hard position to leave just because things were flowing in such a progressive manner. Like, kids were on the ball, but that's the thing is how important is training to the institution? How, what are facilities? What kind of training program are you going to put in there? What kind of resources are you going to have? My first 4 years, or actually 3 years at Jacksonville University, my budget was $500. So that was my budget. So what am I going to do with $500? So, so there's a lot of, okay, well, I have to connect with what coaches are the most successful coaches. Why have they been here, long enough? Is it something I can, finesse them to see to really build relationships, right? Like, hey, can we use some basketball money to get some, some X, Y, and Z? I need new plates. How can I do this? So you have to be really resourceful. And then what kind of limitations do you have, right? Like if I go to the, my director at the time, my administrator at the time, if I go to them and go, hey, is it possible that, we have two, neck machines in the corner and no one's using them. Is it something that maybe I could, get some plates for those machines? Can I trade them in or something? So, how can I use that room, to do that? Secondly is the culture, right? Like what does administration want the culture to be like? Do they want to win? Do they just want to be middle of the pack? What do they see? What's the foreseeable future? How important is athletics to their institution? Is it something that, they want to be known around the community? Because at the time, Jacksonville University, obviously being in Jacksonville, Florida, there was another school in Jacksonville, Florida, UNF, University of North Florida, right? So at the time they were D2, they were moving up. So the biggest thing is, okay, well, does JU, do they want to be known as the only institution? Is it something that UNF is our competitor? One had football, one didn't have football. So the thing is, how are we marketing, how can we be an advocate of this university in the community? And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that is that once you leave the doors of your work, you're still an advocate of the community, right? You're still a walking billboard. If you can have your gear on or stuff like that, or if somebody recognizes that you have the gear on, the thing is, what can you do in the community to make it people known that the school's around? So those are huge issues that you have to really work with and really talk to administrators about of what you can provide those services. At the time, like, social media wasn't huge, right? When I was at JU. So obviously, when you do get to, currently, like I think social media is huge as far as promoting what you want to do culturally. And I think it also helps with buy-in from student athletes at times too, just by posting certain things or whatnot. I think that's huge. So I think being a director, you really have to understand, what your role is, what the school thinks is the importance of athletics is. And then obviously how you want to pretty much deem or pretty much separate yourself from other institutions, whether that's from experience in the past, or maybe you see, a current, program that you want to run your program similar as, or have the same philosophies. I think is it capable of doing it? Do you have the same student athletes? Do you have similar, equipment? What can you do from that standpoint? And then culture is huge too. I think the most success I've had at an institution is when our culture is spread throughout the entire athletic department. So it's not just, one sport has one message, another sport has another message. They're kind of fighting for power, where you can pretty much put everybody under one umbrella, which nowadays is difficult just for the fact that, at one institution, you may have your Olympic, support staff, you may have your basketball support staff, you may have your football support staff, and none of them communicate, right? Or they're all totally separate. The thing is really going out and trying to communicate with those individuals and trying to gain knowledge off those individuals and trying to become one cohesive unit. It doesn't mean that, your salaries all come from the same person, but it means, hey, can we bump ideas off one another? Is it something that you may not be using a piece of equipment one day, we can use it? And also the exercise science department too. If you have an exercise science department or exercise phys department, just gaining knowledge there and really trying to being proactive, getting interns from there, getting volunteers. Is something that, they have technology or a lab that you could use for your athletes, or they could do, if they need testing subjects or whatnot. How can you build those type of relationships, right? So those are all the first things you initially look at. And then from there, I pretty much, meet with coaches, try to get, the coach's perspective on what they want out of the strength staff, and try to convey that message. Because obviously, some sports are, well, I just need my guys to come in 2 times a week just so I cover my back so they have something to do. You can just do whatever you want with them. And other coaches are, hey, I want my guys in 4 days a week. They need to do this program. This is what I want them to do. Can we make it happen? So, I mean, there's so many different, I look at it as being a customer service representative, right? Like we have so many hats and we have to make so many people happy. So you really have to go in there and really try to be cohesive and almost be a chameleon, and really understanding how to work with different personalities and what different coaches need from those aspects. I think that's huge. From a staff standpoint, I think communication is bar none the most important thing. I think even, I say communication, but I think being overly on the aspect of over communicating is even a better analogy, right? Like just really being on the same page. Nobody gets caught off guard, especially if you're an assistant working with a director. The director has so many things to worry about. I think the assistant needs to be proactive on what they're saying all the time, or really communicating where they're going to be and what they're going to do. I've worked in institutions that, we've had 4 different weight rooms on campus, and I might be away from my office because my office is located somewhere. I might be in another weight room the entire day. So if someone reaches out to my boss or my supervisor and wants to know where I'm at or what's going on, and I'm on the other side of campus, it's something where, he or she, it should be something where they have to be like, well, I need to find out, it needs to be something right then and there. They know what's going on, who I'm with, what I'm training. So just really communicating from that standpoint. And I think that's huge with interns. And I think that's, it's one of the aspects I love the most is just, really developing the coaches coming up, right? So I keep saying the word mentor, but like, really being in charge of the interns or really giving them curriculum as far as what's going on. That's one of those jobs I really enjoy. Besides working with athletes, that's something I really enjoy just for the fact that you can pretty much progress your knowledge or your passion onto them, right? And then you can pretty much see it's pretty much sink or swim. So it's either people are going to be infectious and they're going to have the same, passion that you have, or they're going to be like, this just isn't for me, right? So I think that's a huge thing too, is really getting that next level of those being proactive and really trying to coach up that next level as far as strength and conditioning coaches and really making them, passing on your knowledge, but making them the best coaches they can possibly be. Not only the X's and O's, but I think the floor presence is huge. I think floor presence has been lost with the initiation of technology and the initiation of computer devised databases and programs. I think that's something where individuals really need to work on even more is face-to-face dialect, coaching cues, really coaching multiple teams, not just having one team that they have to work with the whole time, but working multiple teams and knowing different personalities of teams and figuring those out, working with males and females, just not being a male-only strength coach or a female-only strength coach. And same thing, I want my females to be able to coach male athletes, and I want my males to be able to coach female athletes. I think that's been lost in a lot of campuses. But that's something I think, some of the best mentors I've had as far as strength coaches have been females, and they've taught me the most as far as like really attention to detail and really being specific and really how to word things specifically, over anybody else. And that's something that's really drawn my attention is I really like, getting those, since there are very few and far between as far as some female strength coaches coming up that want to get into strength conditioning. But the big thing is finding the ones that really are passionate about it, about training, and really seeing them excel and move up to the next level and getting assistant positions. I mean, that's my main goal is really educating those individuals and really, okay, hey, I want to have a program that if an intern's sitting in front of me, I can go, hey, after a year here, you're going to get a GA position or you're going to get an assistant position. Like I'm confident enough in what we do and how much experience that you're going to have that, you're going to get to the next level. And if they stick it out and it pays off, it's so rewarding, right? Because they come back and go, hey, I learned so much from you. I appreciate what's going on. I appreciate what you taught me. And I think that's the most rewarding aspect as far as passing your experience on to them as far as what it's going to take, because, you hear everybody, back in, I'm dating myself again, but back when, when I was a GA and I was an intern and stuff, like it was a protect your desk mentality, right? Like you had to be there from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you were there all the time. And it didn't matter if you had teams or if you didn't have teams, like you didn't leave until, the head guy came back and said, hey, you can go, or, hey, hey, this is it, like you can go home now, or he gave you a call or whatever. Right. So I'm not really, that's cool and everything, whatever, but I don't think you really have to be that intent, right? Like with so much going on, there's other ways to communicate nowadays. As long as you're proficient in what you do and your duties get done and you're in charge of those certain duties, I think and you take care of those duties, then it's huge, right? And as long as it's done correctly. But I think those are big things as far as like really being efficient or being a great strength coach or really trying to devise your program is communication. And then obviously intent to detail, but then obviously that mentorship program really, I don't want to say having a feeder system, but if it's something that an assistant leaves and they can bring an intern or somebody with them, having individuals that kind of like, know the ropes and understand what they're getting into with those certain coaches. Cause you all have the same dialect and same philosophy. Right. So I think that's huge too.
No, that's a lot of great advice for everybody. I took a lot of notes because obviously I haven't been in a director role too at this point. So I'm looking for anything to kind of prepare myself for that position when it becomes available, that I can seamlessly kind of get into it. And I know a lot of times people that are within a new program or even in your first time, you're just going to have to learn on the go. Yeah. So, I know
it's difficult. It really is because, you have, I think a lot of people, once they get that director title, right, they think they're a lot of their old responsibilities, it doesn't like apply to them anymore. As far as clean the weight room, as far as, staying late at work, like things like that. But I think that's how you get buy-in from the staff and buy-in from the athletes. Like, there's plenty of times when I was a director and my assistant might've had golf on the floor, or maybe had cheer on the floor. And, I'm not saying those teams aren't important, but it may be something where I'm out on the floor helping her out. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how you get direct buy-in instead of being like, oh, who's that guy in the office over there? Well, that's so-and-so, you're on the floor, they get to know you. That's how you build that camaraderie, right? Like no person, no title makes you any bigger of a person. It's just a title, right? So I think that's huge too, and those are things I kind of instill on individuals. Like if I have a GA and they have a team, I want to be right there. Like if they need help with something and they're testing vertical jumps and I have to put out the just jump mat, or I have to record something, or I have to do the vertec, like I'm there, like let me know what you need the room set up. Okay, I'll help you set up the room, normally we think those tasks are tedious, right? Or I have to do paperwork, or I have a meeting with the coach. I mean, no task is too tedious, right? It's all about implementing, helping each other out. And I think if, people of leadership do that more often, I think you're going to get a lot more buy-in from interns and a lot more, I guess, respect from those individuals. And really, I said earlier, it's kind of like a sink or swim kind of ordeal. Like, give them tasks, right? Like, just don't be a director that just hands your assistants or hands your interns a workout and goes, hey, this is the workout for the day. This is what you're doing. And then all of a sudden the individual's there and, they may need that at first, but get input, have general conversations. Okay. Hey, give them a task. Hey, you have Susie today. She's coming back from return to play. Like, I want you to design a workout for X, Y, and Z, just something that, so they feel as if they're like involved more, because the more you involve them, obviously the more they're going to put forth effort. And that deals with interns all the way up to first assistants, right? Like, it doesn't matter what they are, but the more power you give them, the more they're going to project themselves onto the student athletes. The more they're going to coach them up, the more they're going to use coaching cues, the more they're going to have floor presence, the more confidence they're going to have, because it's their information, right? Like, it's their input, and everybody wants to feel important. Everybody wants to, say that they were part of something, a lot bigger aspect of something. And you have to give them as much power that you can. Now, I always say it's better for me I always want to pull power away from people rather than telling them that they have to give more, right? I think you've heard that before. Like, if I got somebody in, a new intern in, and they're bouncing off the walls and, jumping all over the place, and it's their first day, I'm like, hey, take the time to read the scenes, see what the room's like, see what different personalities, because some individuals are going to feed off that. Some people are going to be like, this guy, I don't want anything to do with him, right? So it's really about those kind of things. But, never let the title really distinct, who you are. And that's something that I've, even in my current situation, with my director roles that I've had, I tell some people like, hey, I don't want to be a director again. I want to be an assistant. I want to learn more. I want growth. I want to, use my skill set to its fullest. Like, I don't have to be a director, like, it doesn't, the power of that title does nothing for me whatsoever. I want to help individuals be the best they possibly can be, but I also want to help the staff grow. So if it's something that I'm in a assistant role, but I can help everybody around me grow, whether that's through information or whether through his personal experience or whatnot, then that's what I'm going to do, but I think that's I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's something that, it kind of just popped in my head when you were talking, is like, I think a lot of directors just go, hey, I just have men's basketball, so I'm just working men's basketball, and then, well, I'm not helping, stack cups at the nutrition area, because that's not my job, like, no, like, show individuals how things are done, like, that you're willing to go the extra edge, because then you actually care about what's going on, right? And then those individuals go, hey, this person cares about what's going on, like, I'm going to give them my utmost respect, because this is what they're feeding to me, right? This is the knowledge they're feeding on to me. So that's, yeah.
No, I'm glad you cut me off, because that was awesome. No, there's a lot to take away from it. And like, one of the things that got me thinking too, because I've been told a lot of times, like, everybody wants to be a head coach at some point. Everybody wants to be a director, and I think it's kind of awesome to hear you say you've been in that position. But I think I'm sure when you were a GA, when you were an intern, like, you were doing the similar things you were doing as a director. Like, you were mentoring people, you were trying to learn, you, like, no task or no role is above or beneath you. you don't necessarily need to have that title that goes with it if you're already emulating all those responsibilities and roles. So it doesn't really matter. Like, as long as you're a piece, like a positive piece, like within the staff, then you don't necessarily need to have that title. And I feel the same way. Like, I know there's a ton that I have to learn, and it's been a reason why I've not wanted to take like one of the maybe a smaller school or director positions, because I don't think that I would be doing as good of a job or enough justice to some of my assistants,
Right.
like in the position that I am now. I know there's a ton that I still want to learn, but I know at one point that I can't just avoid it forever, because that's inexcusable. I'm never going to know everything to be in a direct role. I'm just going to have to sink or swim at one point. But to hear all the things that you go through is awesome, to kind of like pinpoint all those things, and see that like you're always continuing learning, and you're trying to build buy-in with your coaching staff, and you're on the floor with them. And honestly, that's a huge piece. And I know they appreciate it. Anybody in that position would appreciate that. So kind of touching on some of your continuing education things, what I know you've, like, within your career, you've bounced around, and you've, like, you talked about when you're at Jacksonville going to see the Jaguars train and everything. What does continuing education like mean to you? And honestly, what does it look like to you? And what are some of your favorite methods?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we hit a little bit of just with visiting other individuals, whether it's school or gyms or really anything, and just gaining knowledge in that manner. Now, in the COVID era, obviously, we can't do that. But like when I initially got to Charlotte, there's a lot of institutions around the Charlotte area. You have Belmont Abbey, you have Wingate, you have Queens University of Charlotte, you have Davison, you have Limestone, Wofford's down the road. And those, I mentioned, those aren't all like ACC schools. You obviously have Duke and Chapel Hill and stuff, but, I visit a lot of those institutions, D2 schools, maybe some FCS schools, just for the fact that, first off, I wanted to know those coaches, just who they are, just because they're so close. But secondly, they're not getting high end athletes. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have to develop athletes. I'm not saying D2 athletes are any lesser of anything else, but they're getting athletes that may not be, 5-star, 4-star, 3-star athletes, right? Like, they may not be able to play it in a Conference USA or an ACC level. So I want to see what they're doing at their programs, right? Like, they may be understaffed, right? They may have poor resources. So I want to see, who are they going with for equipment? Like, what are some good equipment choices that they're doing? How are they getting new facilities? How are they setting up their rooms? What are they doing for implementation of the workouts? Are they giving out workout sheets? Do they have a mass sheet? Are they doing something that's a cloud-based system? Like, what are they doing? Because that might be something I can take somewhere else, right? Like, how are they developing their athletes? What's the system that they're running? Just little things like that, is huge. How are they developing their interns? Do they have an exercise science program? Are they keeping a lot of interns in-house, or are a lot of interns leaving to go into other institutions, right? Like, those are all things I need to know. Even around the Charlotte area, there's a huge NASCAR, realm, right? Like, I visited a ton of NASCAR, and a lot of collegiate coaches have moved to NASCAR just because of, security and whatnot. But, how are those jobs functional? Same thing. What kind of facilities? What are they doing to train a lot of these individuals? Because a lot of these individuals are working in a shop 8-hour days, and then they have to train another hour, right? And some of them are training during their lunch break, and some of them are training, after work. So how are they able to, assess recovery? How are they able to assess an individual that just worked an 8-hour shift if they really want to train or not, right? Like, what are the most efficient, pertinent ways? And it's not necessarily going to really carry over a ton to who I'm training, but it's going to give me more knowledge overall, right? It's going to network. I think at the end of the day, as you know, I think networking is key, but it also puts, the Charlotte name out there as somebody who's actually visiting my institution. It's very rare that you have somebody from a larger institution, visiting a smaller institution. It's usually vice versa, right? Like usually, so-and-so is going to this school because I want to know what they're doing, and I've done the same thing, but the thing is I just want general knowledge of what's happening. And I think that's interesting. Right. And then I visited, I've been to South Carolina and Clemson and all that stuff. That's fantastic. But, if I go to Clemson, obviously what they're doing with their athletes, there's some things I just can't do with some of the athletes I have. You know what I'm saying? As far as from a technology standpoint, as far as a human resource standpoint, as far as staffing, I'm just unable to do it. Now some of their stuff makes total sense. So if I got in a larger environment, I'd like to do some of those things, right? As far as some technology aspects, or maybe it's something that, we come into some funding, or I get to a new position and that we have some decent funding, then there's some toys maybe I could use to measure KPIs or whatever. But, it's just gaining knowledge for the future. That's all it is. Or how I can, maybe somebody calls me up and goes, hey, do you know a good system to test vertical jumps or something other than the just jump mat, and it might be something I've seen something somewhere else that I can give them some input. I just want to be a good resource for everybody. That also, it also divides another connection, right? So, like I have a Google Drive document, and I have a Google Drive document of all the interns that ever worked like in Charlotte. When I was at Charlotte, I have all the interns listed, right? And we have like a database. So I have all their contact information, all their emails. So when a new intern comes in, I can go, hey, these are all the individuals that have ever come through Charlotte as a network. So you can, if you have any questions about anything, these are individuals that have given their okay that you can reach out and contact them. So that is an automatic network that you already have for this profession. So if you have a task that you need to do, if there's a job that comes up, this is where these people are at, and you can automatically reach out to them, right? And then from there, I have all the interns or assistants that I've ever had at all the institutions I've worked at. So I have another database, right? And then I could go, okay, interns at Charlotte, here's my database. Since you worked with me, they're automatically your database. Now you have a feeder system, right? And then I have another feeder system of all the strength coaches I've met around Charlotte, right? Like whether it's private sector, whether it's collegiate, whether it's professional, everybody in Charlotte. So now I have these three databases that, our staff can use, that our interns can use, or that individuals that I may come in contact with in the past that are part of my staff or my cohort or whatever you want to call it nowadays. Now they can contact them, right? So now if I get someone that's interested in a position that reaches out to me, or if someone wants to share a certain template, or if someone's looking for a certain resource, or if I get a certain, research article, now I have all these individuals I can ask questions to, or I can mass email it out to them to inform them of what's going on, right? So it's kind of like, that's one reason I do it is just from that network standpoint. But now I have this community that I can continually keep giving back to, and they can keep giving back to me. So if I go and go, hey, has anybody been certified in functional range conditioning? All right, well, hey, Joe from Ortho Carolina Institute, he's exercise science therapist there, or whatever. I'm just making, that's not even really a thing. I just made that up. But he's a therapist there at Ortho Carolina. He's done it before. He's going to reach back to me and go, hey, is this, who do you work, who do you use it on? Is it even worth getting? How to use it? You could, okay, you use it on one-on-one population. You don't think it's good to use in a group setting. I'm just making these analogies up. That's not true. But you know what I'm saying? Like you can get these resources back from people rather than reaching out to other individuals that may not ever get back to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's kind of like a whole aspect as far as the continuing education aspect is using those resources, or how I educate myself is just like before, is just reach around that area. I talk about different lifters, same thing with different lifters. I think social media is huge, right? Like, it can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It's kind of like, kind of like the Star Wars aspect. Like it's either part of the, the dark side or part of the the force, the good side. But it's just a matter of, who you're getting information from, what kind of contact you had, last week I met somebody on there from Charlotte. He trains individuals with autism, right? He gives them physical, fitness workouts, and he also designs workout equipment. So he designs a standalone piece of equipment called the gut wrench, which is like a landmine unit that it doesn't secure to the ground. And then that's a plug. So if he sells any, he has to give me some money. And then he has he designs like a push sled, right? And it just happened that we went and had lunch, had a conversation, told me, a bunch of stuff about that. It just happened that we met on social media, right? So it's like these things all kind of click. And it's just, it's good to meet new people because you don't know what kind of connection or how they'll help in the community, right? Like it's cool like that. So same thing when I travel, like my parents I'm originally from Ohio, right? But my parents transplanted to Florida because they're retired, right? So whenever I visit down to Florida, like the area that they're in, I try to find, hey, what's a place in the surrounding area that maybe, if I'm going a certain way, I could just meet up with somebody, or maybe I could see a facility or, something like that. I have some former interns down there, so maybe I can link up with the intern, if I'm, my wife is from Georgia. So if we're traveling to see the in-laws, what's in Georgia that's, I think there's a trip that, I went to Georgia Tech, I went to, UGA a couple of times. So like stuff like that, like you just make it along the way. Right now, some people don't get the chance to travel that much, right? Just because of COVID time. So like during COVID, I think Zoom is huge, right? Like first initially happened, like everybody was having Zoom meetings. I think I got on a couple of Zoom meetings. There's a group me, group me started with all the collegiate, like baseball strength coaches. I think there's like 80 some individuals in it. So if you have a question, you could throw it in there, and then some people will answer you, some people won't, just like anything else in life, but it is what it is, right? Like, those are all cool things, and it might be, it just changes some perspective on things. Recently I've been reaching out to a lot of high school strength coaches. So, I think high school strength coaches have some great knowledge. I think they're trying to really do good as far as, the way that they're training their athletes, as far as some KPIs and getting some I guess some parameters as far as, strength ratios and stuff. So I really like to pick their brain as far as technology, what they're doing, their protocols, how they handle certain things, like just general stuff. I don't know if that helps out at all, but I think we're all, if you're in this profession, you want to get a little bit better, right? Like it doesn't matter what sport you work with, whether you work with baseball, or whether you work with volleyball, if you work with football. At the end of the day, it's about, how can you increase your skill set? How can you make, your training more effective? But then how can you relay that information to your clients or your athletes to make it a more effective training program? And I think with COVID, what's really, it's put a lot of the stress off of coaching and put it on the individual, right? Like we had home workouts or whatever you're doing, all of a sudden, we were there all the time for the athletes, making sure they were doing everything. And all of a sudden, all that responsibility was pushed on them. Like now it's your turn to get stuff done. And I think that's really shown the athletes that are mature and able to do those things because they've come in and they're ready to perform, right? And then it shows some athletes that still need their hand held, right? Like it is what it is. So I think that's really given a whole new perspective, because before we were always there going, okay, hey, we're going to do this today. We're doing this today. And you were there for them all the time. And now that's a whole nother demeanor that you can kind of work on as far as their maturity state, as far as how much, those athletes that are going to continuously push themselves, you may not have to give them as much attention, right? Because they're self-driven. And then there's going to have these other guys over here on the other side that you have to hold their hand and come across and go, hey, this is a bar. Remember this thing? You haven't picked it up for 6 months. It's something from that aspect. You have to kind of you're going to know who you have to pinpoint a little bit more. But just from a continuing education standpoint, that's what I try to do, and I know you've versed also about, visiting some places and trying to see some different facilities too. But I think getting out and networking is huge. and not just staying in your little circle, your little bubble all the time. But hopefully that helps out. So
No, that helps a ton. I'm in the same boat. And I like what you said too about, like you said, you mentioned all the places in Charlotte and talking to high school and talking to NASCAR and talking to people that honestly may never even help you ever like find a job like at this current moment, or like when you were working with baseball and volleyball, like how does NASCAR like coaching even translate over? It might not in a lot of aspects, but you might pick something up. It might solidify something that you don't want to do with an athlete, or it might be something that you can use further down the line, or maybe that person's looking for a job. Like you never know what you're going to end up like picking up from them or seeing something. I mean, it could be as simple as just how they lay out like their racks or where they distribute like their plates. It could be something so small, but it's something you're not going to be able to pick up in a book. You're only going to see from someone else that's been working in their environment solely, and they've picked up from other people and they've found a way to perfect it. And that's the cool thing about high school and like smaller schools. Like we used to get beat up a little bit by your former university, Mount Union,
right.
when I was at Salisbury.
Yep.
So I kind of know a little bit about it. And those schools, like you work with what you have.
Right.
And like, it was kind of funny. Me and my old boss here, we used to say it all the time. We have everything we need, but we have nothing we want. So you find ways to kind of work within the facility, work within the parameters that you're able to do and that are kind of allotted. And then you find ways to benefit it and make it better. And I think networking and talking to other people and finding ways that you can improve your own situation or how you approach certain things are huge, because you're not going to be able to change the situation you're in, but you can change kind of how you approach it. And that's probably the biggest thing that you could take away from it, unless you just want to skip town and pick a new job.
Right. Which during these times, it's not, you don't want to do that, but, I think it's what's pretty cool, especially, just like you said, I mean, like the NASCAR stuff and some other places you may reach out to talk to people, is it just doesn't necessarily have to do with the performance aspect, right? It could be something from a communication aspect or like a leadership aspect. Like, I think the biggest thing I learned from NASCAR is you have individuals that, you're dealing with a population. You may have guys that are adults, right? Like you may have pit crew guys that are in their late 20s. You may have some guys that may be in their 30s. And then all of a sudden, you have to communicate with them. Where, in our situation, if we're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, it's easy to communicate and convey our message across. Where with older individuals, it's difficult, like because they're set in their ways, or they may have a routine, they may have a family at home. So the biggest thing is to really, what I've picked on is just from I don't want to say maybe a leadership aspect is how you communicate with those individuals and really, you see things on Instagram all the time, like people make charts and like, this is the step, this is the process of how I'm doing this, where, I think those real life applications where you're just sitting back and when I visit a place, I like to ask questions, initially that, you go see but I just like to sit back, and I like to see, okay, these guys are over here, they're kind of doing their thing. He's addressing this person, and I'm not really critiquing anybody, right? Like, but I just want to find out how the room flows and have a perspective, because then that kind of, sometimes it gives me an analogy to go, okay, this is maybe if I have an athlete that maybe I'm not connecting with, or maybe that has a high training age and already is set in their ways a little bit as far as training, maybe it gives me a different path to try to communicate with them. You know what I'm saying? Like, it has nothing to do with X's and O's as far as, philosophy or anything like that. But just like you said, it may be something with the way the room's arranged, maybe how they, what kind of situation how they got to that situation as far as experience goes. It could be a lot more in depth than just, I think a lot of us get stuck on, our philosophy or our X's and O's, our sets and reps, the exercises, and that's great, fine and grand. But, really how you connect and culturally how you coach is huge too. So as many perspectives that you can get from that, I think is beneficial also. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Those are all great points. And it's why I'm a proponent for going to visit other people and talk to other coaches. We were talking about it a little bit beforehand, just kind of like I was at Northern Colorado and Air Force the past weekend, and couldn't be completely polar opposite places. And like all great staffs to talk to and communicate with, but they're dealing with different decks. Right. Like they're in our conference for wrestling, but different expectations, different type of athletes, different environment. Everything's completely different, and it's great to kind of hear how they approach things, how they train with what they have, what they want to do, what's ideal, what given the circumstances they're actually able to do. Those are things that you're not going to be able to pick up without actually going to see them in their environment. You can pick up a phone and go talk to them, but the difference is when you actually go see that, and like you said, going to see how they are interacting in their environment, like you won't get that over the phone. You just can't replicate that stuff.
Yep.
That's awesome. Hey, well, Coach, like any good training session, we finished it off with a good finisher here. So we got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and maybe a little overtime. Arm wrestling doesn't have overtime, do they?
No. They have, I mean, not really. No, they don't.
All right. Well, we might make an exception for today.
That's
then.
fine.
All right. So you can take as long as you want, or you can fire them back right away, and we'll go rapid fire. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. So biggest influence in strength and conditioning, and biggest influence in strength sports.
Jesus. Biggest influence in strength conditioning, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's the one that got me into reading his encyclopedia of bodybuilding, and that was the first book I had on training, and that kind of flipped the switch. Biggest influence in strength sport. Oh man. I'm going to sound really cliche, but Louis Simmons. I mean, it is what it is, right? Like, Jesus. I didn't think I was that kind of cliche, but I'll just leave it at that. So
that's all right. Hey, when you're not coaching and you're not training, what kind of hobbies can you be found doing?
Reading. I like to read. It might take me a little while, but I'll read some books. I'll binge watch some TV shows on right now. My binge is Sopranos, so I'm watching that. And I take a lot of walks during the day when I get a chance, especially if I'm on campus, just to reflect and I might have my phone and call somebody or whatnot, but those are the three biggest things I do. So
I like it. And you might have given this some thought when we had our conversation about like back at Youngstown State. Yep. So if you weren't coaching, what do you think you would be doing? And if you would have got a chance to compete at powerlifting, would you have pursued that?
What would I be doing if I wasn't coaching? I'd like to be a welder. Probably go back to school and be a welder. Something physical. I mean, really, like just to be in the trenches. Like I hate to use the word blue collar, but like that's the way I was raised. And my dad was a laborer, so obviously something in that realm. Would I want to compete in powerlifting? No, I would not. No.
Hey, well, the welding would come in handy. You could hang out with Bartos and start building some new stuff.
Might be his dude to make some equipment. So
that would be awesome. All right. So if we got an ideal training day for you, what's your go-to music or PR song, and what's your go-to post-training meal?
Oh man. Go-to PR song is anything by Jeezy or Lil Boozy, and meal, huh? Any kind of barbecue would be good. Preferably brisket would probably be best. So,
I'm assuming California Carolina barbecue.
Carolina, yep, the old Carolina Gold. It's not too bad. If you haven't had it, I would definitely try it out. So.
Oh yeah, I remember that from my Jacksonville days. All right, so last one I got for you for overtime. This one you might have to take a second for, but favorite under the bar or coaching memory?
Oh man. Jesus. Favorite under the bar. I mean, I think I like. Let's go coaching memory. I think the biggest coaching memory, would be really with the baseball squad at Charlotte. Just I don't really know if there's a specific memory, but just the energy, right? The energy that's in the room, the passion the athletes had for training. Really, kind of a do or die mentality. I think that's what every training session should be like. And the thing is, like I told you before, like I am truly just a thermostat, right? Like I can only increase the temperature so much here or there. It's really the athletes that put the effort and want to get better. But to have that kind of connection with the group and really them to magnify what my personality is like through their training, I don't think there's another feeling like it. So that's huge.
That's awesome. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a cool memory though. And I kind of feel the same way with my baseball guys. They're that blue collar mentality, and most of the time, thermostat wise, I just sit back and let them go.
Right.
Those guys do it. But hey, so going forward, how can people get in touch with you or kind of follow along with what you got going on?
Well, I mean, just like everybody else, right? I guess social media is the huge thing nowadays. So obviously Instagram. I have Instagram. I believe it's at Coach JG Patrick. You can see me lift weights on there. Even though the lifting I do is not what my athletes do. So, don't plug me in that kind of pigeonhole. Email address, jgpatrick13@gmail.com. Or you can reach out, get my cell phone number. I'm not going to give it over here because I don't want a bunch of spam phone calls, but I'm always willing to Zoom or phone call. Is perfectly fine too. So I'll be happy to talk to anybody for sure.
Awesome. Hey, well, Coach, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I mean, I took a lot of notes. I took a lot away from what you said. I like to think that what I'm trying to do with my coaching career is kind of following along with what you've been doing. And I take a lot of pride kind of following your career and seeing how you've done things and taking away from what you've talked about today. It's been awesome to hear those things and dive a little bit deeper into those. So again, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing with the audience today.
No, I appreciate you, man. Like I said, I mean, I'm open book. You need anything, definitely reach out. But, I'm very humbled to be on here, and it's awesome. I mean, I had a great time talking to you. Obviously, I follow what you're doing just through the podcast and your social media account, and I think you're doing great things. And hopefully we can stay in touch.
I appreciate that, Coach. Definitely will. All right. Take care, Coach.
No problem. Have a great day.
Too.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.